doing things that were out of the ordinary, but that were really true to who I was a great way to attract the people who had similar values.
Mm.
And I think that has some broad implications for how we can lead our people in organizations and how companies can talk about themselves in a marketing sense, for example, is that we don't have to be everything to everyone. And arguably we shouldn't be. And if we have the courage to share our real selves, whether as corporations or as human beings, it's really not a popularity contest. It's about aligning on values.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another Open Source Workplace podcast. I'm your host. My name is Steve Todd. I'm Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ and also the founder of opensourcedworkplace.com. Thank you for taking your time to listen to this video today. So what do we do? What do we do here? We bring on industry experts and thought leaders to discuss the current workplace trends. And so what are we going to talk about today? Today's agenda is your home office away from home. What is that? What does that mean? Hybrid working, we're hearing a lot about hybrid working again. It just continues to be in the news. But hybrid working is hard. How is that hard? And we're going to dig into that. And then remote doesn't have to be lonely, right? These are narratives that we're hearing in the market today. So we want to discuss that today. So who are we going to be discussing those things with? Today I'm very happy to be welcoming Amina Moreau, who is the CEO of Radious. And we're going to dig into this. So I want to welcome Amina. How are you doing? Great to have you with us today.
I'm good. Thanks very much for having me. I think we're going to have a pretty lively conversation.
I think so too. You know, I met you through a Clubhouse channel where, you know, you were very shy, retiring, and not very talkative. And we sort of hit it off from that moment, and we've been chatting ever since. So yeah, I agree with you.
I have a lot to say, yes, but I value listening too, because you really have to, as a storyteller, you really need to understand the context in order to know what you have to say, right? So
that's so true. That's a lesson I should learn then. but no, it's really good to have you with us, and I'm glad to sort of welcome you to the OSW channel. As I said, you know, we met through Clubhouse. I heard what you had to say, and I had to reach out. And what you're creating, I think, is fascinating, and I'm really happy that we get this opportunity to share it with the Open Source Workplace audience today. But before we dig into things, what should people know about Amina?
That I'm relentless. I'm relentless, and it's a double-edged sword. But I recently updated my LinkedIn profile to say that I'm not an eternal optimist. I'm really not. But I really love the fact that somehow I tend to see opportunity where other people might not. And it's not that I'm necessarily a silver linings person. I try to be optimistic, but I'm really the average of optimism and pessimism. I'm a cynic and I'm an idealist at the same time, and that averages out to being a pragmatist. And that, combined with my relentlessness of pursuit of meaningful things, is kind of what gets me up in the morning on the good days and the bad.
Wow, that is a fantastic opening, and people can probably see right away, okay, this is going to be a fun conversation, and I think, and you are an opportunist. You know, when I heard your story, that's exactly what came to my mind whenever I see and I hear what you're doing and what you're creating. And I know I'm keeping the audience at bay and sort of digging into this, but you know, you come with energy. So how do you relax? How do you recover?
I've been told that I don't do enough of that, and I should probably find channels to do more of that. But I will say this won't sound relaxing, but it is. I'm an avid tennis player. I'm a competitive tennis player. And speaking of being relentless, every time I'm out on the court, I'm improving something. And really, tennis does two things for me. First, it's extremely meditative. I don't really meditate in the traditional sense, but when I'm on the court, when any player is on the court, if they're thinking about anything else, if they're distracted by a work issue or anything other than thinking about the ball, they're going to miss. They're going to lose. And so it forces me to forget about my work day and everything I'm dealing with and just be present, doing something that I love. Now, that's sometimes that it's not always restful because A, you're running around like crazy and working really hard, but also because I'm relentlessly pursuing progress on the court, sometimes it feels like an extension of my workday because it's like it's yet another thing that I want to get better at. And so sometimes I need to just chill out and just play to have fun. And thankfully, I have good friends and family to remind me to do that once in a while.
Again, this relentless thing just keeps going, and I'm sure it'll come up time and time again as we go through this conversation, which is great. So, what about a fun fact? What fun fact should people know? Obviously, we know you're relentless. We know you love tennis. Well, what else? What other things?
I didn't come prepared for that question. See, that's the thing, and that's okay. Fun fact. When I think about storytelling, my background for most of my career has been in the psychology of storytelling. As I tell people when I'm consulting, let's say with companies or with individuals about, personal branding and stuff like that, is that it's really valuable to get an outside perspective on your story because A, you're so close to it, you can't see it objectively, and B, everything about you is interesting because it's about you. But at the same time, you also might not see yourself for all of the amazing things that make you who you are because it's just regular. You wake up with yourself every day, so the things that other people consider special about you, to you it's just completely mundane because it's just, it's just me. So I think that by the end of the conversation, I will ask you what is a fun fact about me. How about that?
All right. Okay. I think that's that's a surprise to me, but that's okay. We'll do a deal there. And then my goal is to get off air quickly so that we don't have to have this conversation. I'm playing with you, though. I'm playing with you. So, right, you mentioned storytelling, right? And again, I do my prep for these calls, my interviews. I want to make sure I know a little bit about the guest. We've had conversations and digging into you mentioned already your fascination with the psychology of storytelling. Where did that come from?
It came over time. I wasn't always interested in storytelling or in psychology, but my educational background was in psychology simply because I wanted to understand how people work. It's kind of a critical skill in personal and in professional realms. So I went into that field just because I thought it was going to be an interesting skill and a very useful skill to have. And the storytelling part happened a little bit more by osmosis because I had a hobby. I really enjoyed photography, and it just sort of serendipitously turned into a side hustle that turned into a business that turned into a company that ended up winning 5 Emmys and ended up opening up all kinds of doors in my career that I never could have expected. And somewhere along the way, I went from just wanting to create beautiful imagery to really understanding that a powerful story can move people. And not just in an entertainment sense, but perhaps even more meaningfully than that. And not to discount the importance of entertainment, but in ways that could move people to action, to perhaps see the world in a more positive way, to change something to improve their lives. And when I realized, it kind of dawned on me that I could use my education that I had spent a lot of money on and apply it to photography, filmmaking, marketing, communications, the consulting that I do, and just in my own personal life, I realized that storytelling and psychology are almost synonymous, or at least they work in tandem so beautifully. And at the end of the day, what are we doing now? Right? We're connecting over hopefully great communication. And we're going to be telling some stories. And it's how human beings connect. And so I'm fascinated by that because when we can connect with other human beings on deeper levels, I just think we can accomplish more together.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful, and I think the psychology of everything is like coming more prominent today, right? We think about what everyone's gone through over the last 12 months, sort of what people are trying to reconcile. When people look to the future, it's almost I'm getting more fascinated with the psychology of what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what is it we need to go forward. So I love the whole psychology. Storytelling allows us to relate to each other, allows us to help people understand complex things. I think it's fascinating. And the other one you use as well is ethical persuasion. So ethical
Hmm.
persuasion, that's sort of, and I guess in an ethical way, you've persuaded me to tell a fun fact about you today.
We'll see if it actually happens,
We'll
though,
see if that
whether I
actually
actually
happens.
did a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
job
yeah,
of
yeah.
persuading you. Yeah. I just think that there's a really fine line between persuasion and manipulation. And it's a blurry line. And how do we really know when we've stepped over it? And I don't know that. I think everybody's going to have a slightly different definition of it.
And that's going to
But
ask you
what
that.
I see about, pardon?
No, I was going to ask you that because I think, I mean, where do people draw the line? Because to your point, it's the line is different for different people.
Yeah, I think everybody has different values and a different vision. So I don't think that there is any clear boundary that we could all agree on. But I do think that when the intentions are good and the message is meant to promote something beneficial. And again, I'm using some really murky terms here, right? So what does beneficial mean, right? Different for everybody. But if the sentiment is noble and genuine, then using what we know about how people work and how people internalize messages and how people make decisions. We're talking about behavioral economics here. How do people make decisions? Well, it's largely with the subconscious, more emotional parts of their brains. And so, if we want people to do something, believe something, act on something in some way that ideally makes the world better in some way or makes a situation better for another person, then I think it's within the rules to use the tools that we have at our disposal to make those good things happen. It's when it gets turned around and is used nefariously that I have a problem with it.
Yeah, yeah. So trying to move on from that, I really want to sort of look at your background because you spent a lot of time. You mentioned, a company where you all the Emmy awards, but you've started a lot of companies yourself, entrepreneur. You founded a lot of things. What was it pulled you to be an entrepreneur?
Hmm. It's funny because I've never had a real job before. So it's just been this. I never expected this from my life path. I was pre-med. So I had a very, very different plan for myself. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I wouldn't be happy on that path. I had the foresight early on, before spending all the money and all the time on med school, to think about what I really wanted and what my motivations were. And I realized I was doing this more out of expectation than I was out of passion. But that this hobby that I had could maybe kind of accidentally be turned into a business. And you know the story there. But really, at the end of the day, once that first company was formed, and my team and I, because I co-built it with others, as it became successful, and as we really got to know our audiences, our customers, and really got a great idea of the landscape, we realized, ooh, there's a gap in the market over here for this niche thing, and over here for this other thing. And so we started to spin out these startups that were effectively just incubated by the parent company. And eventually, they were just maybe a side project, a little startup within a startup sort of thing. But then they would develop enough traction that it made sense to spin them off as separate companies. And so, depending on how you count, there have now been five. Five such companies. And some of them were acquired. Some of them I I parted ways with to pursue other things, one of which I'm doing now, which I'm super excited about. And I just couldn't imagine anything else for myself. I never realized it when I was deciding on my path, but I'm built for this. And not to harp on this whole relentless thing, but entrepreneurship requires that. It requires this doggedness, sometimes to a fault. And I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else.
No, that's fantastic, and then I think that's a nice segue into what you're doing today. I just want to pull up because you told me about the story of what you've created here with Radious, and I'm just like, wow, this is fantastic. And it's like, okay, so how did you get to that? And just like you said, right, through experiences, seeing opportunities. So why don't you tell the folks how you even got to see Radious, the idea of it, the conception of the idea as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm happy to start there. It came from a very personal place because I'm an Airbnb host, and in the middle of the pandemic, we had to shut down the space that we were renting out. We've got a little studio apartment downstairs that we were renting out to vacationers and people traveling for work and stuff, and it was great. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to shut everything down. And in the middle of the summer, we had a debate with ourselves because while we were allowed to reopen it, we didn't quite feel safe doing so. And I mean, if you think about it, like washing a stranger's linens during a pandemic, no, thank you. And it didn't feel safe for us. It didn't really feel safe to have people come into a strange space for them. And so we just kept it shut down. But at the same time, that place, it covers 2/3 of our mortgage.
Mm.
And so at some point we had to have a conversation. Like, what are we going to do here? And can we get creative? So we started brainstorming, and it was just over brunch on a weekend that we were having this conversation. And I was like, well, what if we moved the bed over to the side, or even got rid of it entirely, and instead turn that space into a really comfortable, even inspiring workspace. Put a desk in there. The Wi-Fi downstairs is blazingly fast, and we could rent it out to our neighbors who are working from home, maybe aren't loving it because of distractions or whatever. And we're like, okay, that we could do that. Could that be a platform? And now that was roughly in August of 2020. And so that's before these companies that we've seen come out and make some big announcements had made any headlines. But over the next few weeks and months, we started seeing companies like Spotify and Pinterest and Salesforce start to make announcements about working from anywhere, or that they were shedding their real estate. And it just occurred to us, holy, like if this is becoming a cultural shift, and it's not just a band-aid during the pandemic to work remotely, could this be a scalable platform that addresses not just individual workers' needs, but employers? Because now we're having conversations about turnover cost and retaining and attracting the world's top talent. And that was never anything that we'd considered over brunch in August. But now we were starting to see, wow, this could really be a huge opportunity and a huge need in the market that we might be able to fill. And so we have been working really, really hard to make it available. It's a marketplace, and what we're doing is getting residential spaces that could be turned into amazing workspaces and meeting spaces, I should say, and making them available to employees who either need a solo place to work that's out of their house and get a change of scenery or escape whatever chaos that exists in work from home situations, or just get like that meaningful like work-life separation. Or once it's safe to be in groups again, to have meetings. Because that's the other thing, is that right now, a lot of the conversations that people are having, even regarding hybrid models, they're still looking at those hybrid models as being binary, that it's working from the traditional office or working from home. But remote work is not synonymous with working from home. It is during a pandemic because that's kind of the only safe option we have. But as the pandemic subsides, you can work remotely and collaboratively in places other than your home or the traditional office too. So I'm really excited to be bringing to market an opportunity for people to meet, continue working remotely, but outside of their homes, but in their neighborhoods. So imagine walking 3 doors down to your neighbor's guest house turned office that has 5 workspaces in it, and actually getting to see your colleagues again.
That's fantastic, and again, like, look, fair play to you for one, seeing the opportunity and actually going through that experience, and then actually coming up with an idea, and then being relentless about the execution of that idea. I love it. I love it. So obviously, you have this idea, and entrepreneurship isn't just kind of an idea and then just rolling stuff out and things just happen, right? To your point, right?
Yeah.
So you've taken this out, and when I heard it, I was like, okay, I gotta have a conversation with Amina, because this is like really interesting. The more I thought about it, I thought, like, yeah, we know people want alternative places to work because we don't know how working from home is sustainable for the long term. Granted, at the moment, people have to, as you just said. So is there this other place, your place away from home, that you can actually go to? And so as you've talked to companies and you've had these conversations, what problems are you solving for them?
There are a few. The biggest pain points that companies have communicated to us and that we've seen them talk about are employee engagement and innovation, those serendipitous interactions, water cooler talk. We've seen a lot of conversations about water cooler talk missing when you're working remotely, or at least you're working solo out of the traditional office. So there's that. So innovation is one of them. Employee engagement and satisfaction, which certainly is tied to productivity and innovation. But then also, if your policies are inflexible, in a climate where flexibility is probably the number one requirement right now for candidates, and just for contributors in general, turnover cost and losing your best people or not attracting the best people is a really big concern. And then you've got things like security, you've got safety, but then you also have, well, what if our IP gets leaked and things like that? So that's a consideration. So I mean, obviously, there's an environmental component to forcing people to commute back to the office. There are social and equity considerations, because we're starting to hear conversations also about having 2 classes of citizens: those who come into the office and schmooze with the boss versus those who don't, and then maybe miss out on opportunities to grow within the organization. And I mean, we could do an entire podcast just about the complexities of that. But also, not everybody has a really great working from home environment. Not everybody can afford it either. So it's an equity and it's an access issue, and it's a cost issue. And I think that employers are starting to realize also, like, a lot of them are saying, man, I wish I could get out of this 10-year lease that I still have 5 years on, because we're not using the space, or we will be using the space, but at a tenth of what we needed in the past. And so what I'm super excited about is being able to address virtually all of those issues by providing a solution that is flexible, that allows for that collaboration, that is secure, and that gives employees the tools and the access they need to feel fulfilled in their roles. Like, that to me is probably the best and most exciting part, is the idea that people could feel more fulfilled in their work, because that trickles into all the rest of their lives too.
Right, right. No, absolutely, 100%. I'm sure, and you articulated so well, the challenges with hybrid, right? And we sort of said at the outset, hybrid is hard. So what are the challenges that you see around a hybrid working system?
Well, first, I agree. I agree that hybrid is hard. It's harder than either of the other two extremes. The challenge is, though, that I do believe that very few companies going to end up 100% remote or 100% back to the traditional office. Most companies, I predict, are going to fall somewhere in the hybrid sphere. And there are going to be countless models for what that looks like. And I can't say that there's going to be a silver bullet, that there's going to be one model that works for every company. Everybody's going to have to figure it out for themselves because they all have different needs. And it might also extend down to different departments having different needs. And so it's not going to be ubiquitous across the entire organization if you're a bigger one with, different mandates. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, is going to be, how do we collaborate? And that's certainly one of the most common conversations I've been seeing. And so how do we collaborate? And how do we prevent being divided into two classes where now the remote workers feel like second-class citizens? And the collaboration part, I think, is going to get easier over time. Because right now we're still in the pandemic. Vaccines are now, I think, available to everybody over 16 across the country. So that's a good start. And as it becomes safer and safer to be in groups again, people are going to start realizing that remote isn't synonymous with working from home, and that remote doesn't have to mean lonely either, which is going to open up so many minds and so many opportunities for how to collaborate without forcing everybody to commute back to the main office. So I'm really excited for that because I think that addresses one of the biggest challenges in hybrid models is how do we collaborate? You just meet up, but you don't have to drive. You don't have to all be in the same place. You just get the teams that need to be together. That's it. And then the citizen issue of having different classes, I think really can be addressed by having those types of spaces. And when I say spaces, I also mean metaphorical spaces. Sure, physical spaces to meet, definitely. But also just giving people the freedom, the brain space to do their work in the way that they feel they do it best, whether it's through asynchronous work and asynchronous communication. I think that's going to be a big one. There's a lot of technology, a lot of innovation happening right now to facilitate that. I think there are going to be a lot of ways to solve the hybrid problems that are going to inevitably come up. But can I share with you a fear that I have that occurred to me earlier this week?
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with an HR professional over Slack in one of those HR Slack channels. And she was expressing to me that that remote people were starting to feel a little bit oppressed by the organization, and that she was doing a lot of work with executives to change mindsets a little bit. But it wasn't working. And I asked her, do you feel like that could ever become an intentional tactic to make remote workers feel mistreated, to intentionally mistreat them so that they have no other choice but to cave and then come back to the office? And by that account, companies engineer the failure of remote work to suit their needs and then conclude publicly, see, remote didn't work. Everyone wanted to come back. And so that's a fear that I have. Now I'm really showing my more cynical colors. I would
Yes.
like to think that this wouldn't happen. But I guess my bigger fear is that it would happen unintentionally, just due to inexperience or negligence. That maybe there aren't bad actors that are forcing it to happen and engineering it, but simply don't care enough to put the effort into solving these problems, which are going to be inevitable, and then conclude, no one really wanted to say remote anyway.
Yeah, well, my hope is that there aren't bad actors out there. I'm sure there is, but I hope that there isn't who are, who are intentionally trying to drive people out of organizations through this sort of that sort of management. I hope not. I hope not. I don't think so, and that's the optimist in me thinking, that viewpoint. But there are fears in that, and we think about the war of talent, right? And we think about how talent is being recruited aggressively through the world because I read a statistic, something on LinkedIn, there's like 6 times more remote jobs being posted now than there was a year ago. And that's only going to increase and increase. And I think there is going to be other opportunities. And I think companies are going to be more aggressive in their pursuit of talent by offering more flexibility. So as you talk to companies, are you hearing the requirement for flexibility?
Most of the companies that I've been talking to are still trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Very few are 100% sure of their path. I would actually venture to say that anybody that claims to be 100% sure is lying or is irresponsible, because I believe it's going to take a journey of iteration. I don't think we're going to get it right just out of the gate. We're going to have to put stuff out there and kind of treat it like a startup. Put it out there, test it, get feedback, iterate, and so on. But I will say that many of the people that I've been talking to recognize that flexibility is the top priority. And when I say flexibility, I also mean autonomy, freedom. And I really do believe that, and this is my psychology background coming sort of weaving its way into the conversation, that autonomy is one of the three things that human beings need for, quote, optimal functioning: autonomy, competence, and relatedness, which is the social aspect. And when we have autonomy in our lives, in our careers, in our day-to-day, we are more intrinsically motivated to do the thing that we're doing.
Mm.
And a whole other, set of benefits too. But don't we want our teams working on whatever it is they do, not because they're being paid, not because their boss expects them to, but because they love it?
Mm.
It's the output. It's just the output, and the results are going to be so much better all around. And then on top of that, you have a fulfilled workforce that becomes an evangelist of the work they do and the overall brand and company. It seems like a no-brainer to invest in that.
Whenever we think about remote, and one of the things we've heard about this, especially through the pandemic, is a loneliness. Is working remotely, is it a lonely process?
Remote is lonely right now. It is. I'm lonely. And I am sick. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of these four walls. I am ready for a change. And I'm ready to be with people. And I'm an introvert. I can't even imagine what the extroverts are feeling at the moment. But we're in a pandemic. And I think the point you made before is a really wise one, that the difference between working remotely during a pandemic is a completely different situation than working remotely in non-pandemic times. Between our kids being back in school, to being able to collaborate in groups in person, to being able to go to the pub, there's so many things that are going to be different very soon, fingers crossed, and it won't have to mean loneliness anymore, is my view on it. And I'm very excited for that. I think it needs to happen, and soon.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I want to thank you for your time. Before we wrap up, is there any final thoughts you want to leave with the audience today?
Well, I do want to ask, what's a fun fact about me?
I knew that was coming. That's why I was trying to hesitate.
Trying to distract me, huh? No, I won't put you on the spot. I'll try to answer that question. I think a fun fact. I do really like climbing things.
Climbing things?
When I was a kid, I lived on the roof of my house. And I think that I love that so much because it gives me a really great vantage point. I love being able to see far. And I like the metaphor of that too. But it was also a really nice escape. Because I knew my parents weren't going to follow me up there. They'd be afraid to fall off or fall through. And it was a place for me to just be. It was mine. And people thought I was crazy for being there. And that kind of added to the appeal. That very few people wanted to join. But the people who did want to join me there, they were the crazies too. I'd have sleepovers up there when I was 12. Bring the beanbag chair up. And it was kind of, looking back at that time, now that I'm an adult, it was a really great way to find my tribe. Doing things that were out of the ordinary, but that were really true to who I was a great way to attract the people who had similar values. And I think that has some broad implications for how we can lead our people in organizations and how companies can talk about themselves in a marketing sense, for example, is that we don't have to be everything to everyone. And arguably we shouldn't be. And if we have the courage to share our real selves, whether as corporations or as human beings, it's really not a popularity contest. It's about aligning on values. And man, I'm turning a fun fact into
I love it.
Philosophical thing. Maybe that's awesome. A fun fact. I have a way of weaving into some depth here.
You have a way of telling
not
stories.
What was asked. But yeah, I think being on that roof in my beanbag chair in my hot pink socks, reading a book, it helped me deepen some friendships. And I think I kind of take that approach now too.
Fantastic. Look, that is so good. And I'm glad we were able to squeeze that in. So, Amina, look, I want to thank you. Thank you for your time. I wish you every success. We'll keep in contact. And folks, we will share links. Please reach out to Amina. Do follow her. Go listen to her. If you're on Clubhouse, make sure you follow her and go listen, because honestly, it only gets better. Amina, thank you for your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was fun.